particular book that's before you, which wasn't actually what my publisher wanted me to write, because the memoir had been published. It had somewhat been successful for a first-time a writer who was writing in a second language. And they wanted me to write more of the same book. They wanted me to do part 2 of book 1. And of course, being inherently stubborn, I immediately realized that that's what people wanted me to do, and I decided that it wasn't obviously what I was going to do. But of course, artistically, it seemed like not something that would foster thinking and creativity. And therefore, and God knows I was no longer interested in spending another second on my own history or background. And allow me to inject a parenthetical here also and say that even my memoir is not about my entire life. I didn't have that much patience for myself. It's about 10 years of life from 1974 to 1984. In other words, the transformation of Iran from a monarchy to an Islamic republic. And that was as much time I could spend thinking about myself, my own family, and my life in Iran. So the second book, I tried to conceive in a way that would somehow be close to my heart, be a book that I still could feel it within my own gut without really being immediately about myself. And in the process of that, I looked at one of the fundamental narratives, one of the major discrepancies that exists within the knowledge that even those who are interested in Iranian history lack about Iran. And then the question really arose, why? Why should a story of this importance have gone untold? Why do people who deal with Iran, who think about Iran, whose job it is to pay attention to Iran, have not paid attention to this history? So perhaps by the end of this conversation, you and I will come up with an answer. I have a few hunches. But so in that process, I thought that I wanted to write something that I had strong feelings for, but at the same time was an important piece of information that was missing from this vast knowledge or vast coverage of Iran, which is around the clock, but at the same time somehow limited in scope. And in that process, I met a man who ended up being my house guest about 5 years ago. And damn, he was a great storyteller. And I didn't know him at all. He was at my house, a dinner guest, for about a few days, visiting my husband, with whom he was friendly. And my husband is always late home from work. And so he and I would hang out in the kitchen at night. And as I was chopping the onions and preparing dinner, we had to make conversation. And the thing that he brought up was that, well, tell me, what have you, what's been interesting about your history? And of course, he said, well, I was sitting in a restaurant once, and a man with a machine gun walked in and shot us at our dinner table. And, I ducked under the table behind me, and I survived. And I say, you don't say. So it was really with complete reluctance, and perhaps I should admit a great degree of ignorance, that I ran into the story that became this book before you. So I met the survivor of this assassination that I recount in this book, and this is a very strange admission on my part, because I'm a very squeamish person. I never go to crime. I've never read crime novels. I always reach for the remote control and change the station if somebody draws out a gun. So the idea that I wrote about an assassination is unbelievable to me. However, As he told the story to me, I realized that the assassination itself, the actual killing, which was hugely intriguing to my publisher, by the way. As soon as I talked about it with my editor, he was really interested in the kinds of the guns and how many bullets and how many people dropped dead and how long did it take until they were all definitively dead. All of these things didn't seem all that interesting to me, actually. But what did seem incredibly intriguing was what happened after the assassination itself. In other words, between the time that the criminal investigation began and a trial about 13 months later started, and a judgment that was issued nearly 3.5 years later, meaning within the complete arc of the timeline, about 5 years after the assassination had occurred, which, as you will see, really shook Iran and then its relations with Europe as a continent, and then changed in a way the trajectory of Iran in 1997 forward. And I hope to be able to get to all that within the next 10 minutes or during the Q&As.